so that people who were not able to attend today will be able to join us. A few housekeeping before we get started. Um, if you hover above at the top of your screen or at the bottom of the screen, you should see an icon that says Q&A. Feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. We will do our best to answer them during the webinar, but if we can't, we will be sure to get to those questions at the end. And we're going to go ahead and get started. So for those of you who don't know the Dan River Basin Association, we go by the acronym DRBA. We were started and founded in 2002. Our service area covers 3,300 square miles, both 8 counties in North Carolina and 8 counties in Virginia. We protect all the waterways within that service region. We protect the Dan River and of course all of its tributaries, the Smith, the Mayo, the Bannister, the Hyco, and the Sandy. We do that in 3 different ways. Our pillars of our organization are recreation. We have first Saturday outings that are open to all ages, all abilities, once a month, the first Saturday. We develop parks, trails, and river accesses. We assist municipalities with master planning. We have an interactive map on our website that shows all of those amazing outdoor recreation. I'm getting ahead of myself. All those amazing outdoor recreation assets. And we do special outings for members and groups. I want to remind you that this Saturday is National Trails Day and also the first Saturday of the month. DRBA has not been able to hold a first Saturday outing, unfortunately, for the last couple months. So this month, we have decided to ask everyone to go out and visit their favorite trail or river, take a picture, and post it on our Facebook page. So hopefully we'll see lots of cool things from around the basin this Saturday. Educational programs, we reach approximately 10,000 youth a year. We have a new program called DRBA at Home, which is, you can find information about all of these programs on our website. I really encourage you to visit our website and spend a few hours exploring all that we do. Water quality testing, I am so proud of all of our citizen water quality monitors who have continued to monitor our waterways during the health crisis we've been facing. We have a water protector certification program open to everyone. I encourage you to check that out. We look at riparian buffers around the region. We do storm drain marking projects as well as cleanups. So let's get started talking about the Mayo River State Park. For those of you who don't know where it is, here it is right here on the DRBA map, down here between Eden, Stoneville, around the Stokes County and Henry County line. So it's right here. In the beginning, a lot of people don't realize that, but DRBA was actually the beginning founders of the Mayo River State Park. Back in January of 2003, the North Carolina State Parks replied to the Rockingham County Commissioner's resolution supporting the creation of this park, saying they didn't have the resources to do it. But the county manager, Rockingham County Manager Tom Robinson, asked Lindley and T. Butler and Jeff Johnson of the newly formed Dan River Basin Association to take on the project. They jumped on it, formed a park committee, secured supporting resolutions from 7 governments, 3 chambers of commerce, 11 civic groups, and 12 member organizations, and persuaded the county's legislative representatives to sponsor a bill establishing the park. And good news, on the 31st of May in 2003, the bill was passed and the park was established. So making the park a reality. Lindley Butler and Jeff Johnson visited about 3 dozen landowners along the river, offering the state's land appraisal with no obligation. They guided state park staff on surveys of potential park properties, including Falls Creek, Cedar Mountain, and Old Mayo Park facility, and they provided a river trip from Anglin Mill to the Dan. So they had to acquire the property, and they needed a lot of partners to do that. So Piedmont Land Conservancy back then facilitated the appraisal process. And hosted by DRBA, the State Parks held an open meeting in March of 2004, inviting 200 landowners to come and talk about this park. By the end of the year, 800 acres had been acquired. In 2005, the University of Professor William Whittaker contacted the Butlers about the old Mayo Park buildings that had been designed by internationally renowned architect Antonin Raymond. Today, those historic structures are preserved because DRBA arranged a meeting with Whittaker and the state park officials that resulted in those historic structures being restored. So I am going to stop my section here and invite Brian Starkey to come and talk about the actual plan, master plan, to continue the wonderful work over at Mayo River State Park. Brian?
Thank you, Tiffany. Can you all hear me? Or Tiffany, can you hear me? Give me a thumbs up.
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
Okay, let me start that here. Okay, I've got the presentation up. You probably can't see me, but can you see the presentation?
We cannot see it quite yet.
Okay. Hopefully it's coming on here. Nothing quite yet?
No, we still can't see your screen.
Okay. All right, hold on. Let's see. Tiffany and I apologize. Tiffany and I went through this yesterday, and I'm not the most technologically adept
It's
person.
all right, Brian. We'll get it up there for you.
So I've got.
You're going to hit your share screen button, and then you're going to click on your PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah. Where was that share screen button?
If you hover at the bottom of your screen, you should see share screen.
Got it. Okay.
I believe it's coming up. Let's start that from the beginning.
How about that?
There you go. Here we are. Thank you so much. I'm going to go on mute right now.
Okay. And I don't know if you all really need to see me. I was having a little bit of difficulty doing that. I'm just going to present without you seeing me, unless Tiffany can tell me exactly how to do that.
You just go ahead and get started. It's all right.
All right. So without the benefit of seeing me, thank you all for being here. It's great that there's an interest on your part to learn more about Mayo River State Park. I'm going to introduce myself first. My name again is Brian Starkey, and I am a landscape architect with a firm in Raleigh called the Timmins Group. Timmins Group is a full service sort of planning, design, engineering, landscape architecture firm. And we're very pleased and excited about being involved in this project. We have done, one of our passions is park work, and we have done numerous municipal parks across the state of North Carolina. But we've also been involved in the last 5 or so years with the North Carolina State Parks Department. We completed a master plan for the expansion of Hanging Rock State Park. We are currently working at Morrow Mountain State Park down in Stanley County. I've also done some work at DuPont State Recreational Forest in Henderson in Transylvania County. But we're very excited to be involved in Mayo. We recently, well, we've been up several times, but recently took a paddle trip. And I got to tell you that it was just a real unexpected pleasure to go down the river corridor. Really felt like we were in the wilderness. We got in at the boiling hole and took out 4 hours later downriver, and didn't see one house. It was just very, very wonderful. I think this is a undiscovered gem at this point. Some of you are certainly aware of the Mayo and what it has to offer, but I think statewide, it might still be a little bit of an uncovered, not something that's been discovered by everyone. And our audience is statewide. This is, of course, is a state park, but obviously has roots locally, which is also a very interesting aspect of this site and this corridor. So what I'm going to do today is give you a little bit of an overview of the area that we are studying and talk a little bit about the project schedule, some of the work that's been completed to date, some of the project objectives that have already emerged in conversations, mainly with staff, but with some community involvement. And then I'm going to talk about community involvement and community engagement and how you all can become involved in this project, and we certainly hope that you do. So from a project overview standpoint, we are looking at the river corridor from the Virginia line to the confluence with the Dan River. We have been in touch and are coordinating. We have a stakeholder committee that meets about the project periodically, and we do have some representation from the Virginia State Parks Department. And so we're coordinating with them. They'd very much like to do some improvements on their side of the state line. And so it runs from north to south from the Virginia state line to the confluence with the Dan. Looking at it east and west, we really don't have, definitive boundaries. Obviously, there are properties along the corridor that the state already owns. We're going to be looking at properties along the corridor that might be critical to the protection of the Mayo River corridor, but we really don't have any defined boundaries east and west. We are looking at what the existing facilities at the park offer. We're going to be looking very closely at natural and cultural features, future land acquisitions, as I said, and just really what the master plan does is provides a guideline for future improvements. It's not something that'll happen next week or the week after the master plan is complete. These things normally take a long time, but it's a roadmap for further development, further improvements to Mayo River State Park, which is geared towards enhancing the experience that everyone has at the park. So that's really the goal of the master plan, is to really protect natural and cultural resources, provide increased experience for visitors, all within the mission of the State Parks and Recreation Department. From a project schedule standpoint, we are in the early stages, and that's why I'm really sort of excited to talk to you all today, to make you all aware of this. As we are in the early stages, we are still collecting information and doing site assessment work, gathering information, informing and educating community. And like I said, we have a stakeholders committee, which Tiffany is on, as well as representation from Piedmont Conservancy, local town representation from Mayo Dan and Stoneville and Madison, and the list goes on. Some, like I said, some folks from the Virginia State Parks Department and so on. But we've been talking with the stakeholders primarily, defining the goals and objectives for the project, and defining the process, excuse me. Obviously, the world we're living in today threw a bit of a curveball at us. Normally, when we do these kinds of projects, we look forward to and value, the conversation that happens in a one-on-one or in a group community meeting where, there's immediate feedback. We learn an awful lot from the communities that we work in. We come in, we don't live there. We get to know whatever property that we're working on. We get to know it as best as possible. In this case, the corridor, but we will never know it as well as the local folks know it. And we really value that local knowledge, and it very much informs what we do, and the goals and the objectives, as well as the results of the master plan. So I will encourage you later further to be involved in this project, because we value your experiences, your input, your knowledge. So this is phase one, information gathering, site assessment. Phase two, we move into our preliminary planning, where we start to put some of these ideas that we hear and some that we create on our own, and we start to put those on paper. Continued development of the existing park program and improvements is part of that. But we certainly have already identified a number of maybe new programmatic elements that can come to Mayo and again serve that purpose of providing a great recreational experience. Within that, obviously, we're identifying land use alternatives for future development. what sort of facilities are best suited to what pieces of land along this corridor. And then we move into some final recommendations, first in phase 3 with a draft master plan, again coming back and asking for community and stakeholder input, and developing that draft master plan, which works and moves into the final master plan, final recommendations, which concludes really with the approval of the North Carolina State Parks Department. So that's a bit of that's the outline of our project process. Really, there's not much schedule there in terms of dates, but what I can tell you is that we feel like this project will be wrapped up and the final recommendations and report of the master plan should be made, we're thinking in late September, early October. So work completed to date. We have spent a fair amount of time with the park staff there at Mayo. Any of you that know Keith Martin, who was superintendent at the park, and I say was because his last day of employment was last Wednesday. So if any of you know Keith and want to reach out to him, we can certainly get you his contact information. But Keith has been a great resource for us in starting this project. You see Keith right there in the green ball cap, and he will still be involved in the project, but in a capacity with the Friends of the Mayo group. Obviously can no longer participate as a state employee. But we have, as I said, met with staff on several occasions, both at Mayo, Keith and his staff, as well as the folks in Raleigh, and we have weekly or bi-weekly meetings with the folks in Raleigh here. We have made multiple visits to the corridor, including the paddle trip, in which only one person got wet, so we considered that a victory. You know, we've spent time here since, you know, really early April, getting to know this corridor as best we can. We've had one stakeholder meeting. I mentioned the stakeholder committee. We have had one meeting with them thus far. And we've also initiated a website for the project, which is a vehicle for you all to be involved. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. So like I said, a couple images of us getting out and looking at the river corridor, as well as looking, you know, at access points. One of the challenges here, obviously, is that this is a linear park, and there's several access points needed to get to certain points on the river. And so we've spent time looking at adjacent lands, doing a lot of walking with Keith on old road beds and access points that might be viable to get people to the river. I did mention the one paddle trip. This is from that morning, and it was, as I said, just a wonderful experience. In fact, I told a friend of mine the other day that is a big paddler that he needs to go there. And again, as I said, he was not really aware of it. I said, this is an unbelievable paddle, and it's only, he lives in Durham. It's only an hour and 15 minutes from Durham. So we did enjoy that, and you know, this really helped us understand the character of the river, looking at some of the major natural features as well as cultural features along the corridor. Part of that natural feature is certainly plant material. As landscape architects, we're pretty tuned in and you know, love plants, particularly native plants. You see a little bit of a pinkster azalea here. We did find along one of our visits, surprising to me, because I'm accustomed to seeing this in the mountains, but this is trout lily, and it was growing in some of the sand that had been washed up on the banks from previous flooding, which we saw a lot of. Obviously the Mayo probably, well, I don't know if it got to any sort of record levels, but it certainly probably crested here pretty high in the last couple of weeks. But and we saw a lot of that on our trip as well. Areas where the river as a living organism has deposited a lot of debris here and there, in addition to sand, you know, obviously timber, wood, and so on. But you know, we've seen a lot of it. This is a little bit of a just an example of some of the mapping that we're doing, and you can see this on the website. One of the things we are looking at is endangered plants. Again, this is an example of just one of the things we're looking at. We're looking at topography, we're looking at geology, hydrology, we're looking at plant species as well as cultural resources. And so, you can go on the website, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but we are in the middle of mapping and documenting what we think is important. And again, looking to the community and the stakeholders to help us with that so that we can identify what needs to be protected, what resources are fragile. We certainly, want to make those accessible to people to learn about the corridor, but it's striking that balance between access and protection that is always the challenge when working with a natural environment, state park, or something of that nature. Just wanted to show a couple of images of some of the things that we have experienced. This is the confluence of the North and the South Mayo Rivers, where they come together up by the Virginia line. And in fact, we had to obviously travel into Virginia to get access to this point. This is a wonderful spot along the river where the two tributaries come together and form the Mayo. Falls Creek waterfall at the Shazo Mills access. I was told the other day that in recent weeks, with everyone just really wanting to get outside in lieu of other alternatives, how to spend their time, that the pond there at the base of the waterfall was pretty solid with people. So a lot of people getting out and using that. What you don't see in this picture, but what we took note of to the left of this image, is the old foundation for the old mill that once stood here. The bowling hole is obviously a community gathering spot that has existed for a long time. It is very important to the community. A little bit of artwork on the rocks here, but that sort of well, it's just evidence of community, of this being a community spot, a social spot, and I see a lot of people enjoy this area, and this is really where we sort of took off from our paddle trip. You can see here we looked at one place called the Joyce Ford Road access point, and this is where I saw that trout lily, but you can see the sand up on the banks of the river. We were lucky enough to get out there before all the leaves came out, so you could really get a sense of the landforms, without the vegetation in place, which is always helpful to us to really understand some of the magnitude of the topography and how the land moves. The Avalon Dam with Cedar Mountain in the background. The private owners of this land and this dam and the plant that exists there were kind enough to let us on and let us go see this dam, which was also quite remarkable. There is obviously a challenge here if you were to paddle or move down the river in any way. Where I'm taking the picture, obviously we're on private land, but looking over towards Cedar Mountain, one of the things that we've talked about is, looking for a way to portage around this dam. You can see by the character of the water below the dam that there are a lot of riffles, a lot of rock. So even if you were to portage immediately around the dam, getting back in right there at the base of the dam is not really an option either. We've got to work, got to look further downriver to get folks back into the water if we're able to, implement a continuous paddle north to south. But a beautiful dam nonetheless. And we actually saw a bald eagle out there that day as well. Getting closer to civilization, this is the Washington Mills site. And probably some of you are aware that there have been plans in the past, once this mill came down, for it to be a park. There is some discussion and an offer has been sort of made by the town. They would, I think, be very interested in this becoming part of the state park. That decision has not been made, but it's on the table and we're talking about it. And what could possibly happen on this site to benefit the park, to benefit the community, I think it's an opportunity to help tie the community stronger to the park. And that was reflected a little bit in the in a master plan for a park here that was previously done. And some of you might be aware of that. A couple other, this is looks like a natural feature, but it's also a cultural feature. This is right at the Virginia line, and this is called Bird's Ledge. It was named after the surveyor that did some of the original survey work here. So again, while it's a natural feature, it also has some cultural and historical significance. Of course, you probably all recognize this, Mr. Raymond's picnic shelter at Mayo. And if you don't know, he was a disciple of Frank Lloyd Wright. And if any of you know Frank Lloyd Wright's work, you can see that in this building. It's also a pretty, well, I don't want to say it's a duplicate, but Mr. Raymond had also done a temple in Japan. And this picnic shelter looks very much like that temple in Japan. Of course, Frank Lloyd Wright did a lot of work in Japan and was influenced by the Japanese culture. So, and then, you know, we're digging back into the history a little bit to understand what came before us, not just what's there now, but what came before us. And this is an old picture. I don't know what the year is exactly, but this is the old metal Anglin Bridge on Anglin Road. And, you know, this is sort of a side passion of mine, is just the history. And we look to the history of the places that we work in to influence our approach to design and planning, as well as nature. So we look at history, we look at nature. And, you know, one of the things that we'll talk about in a second is that, you know, we want to bring that to the forefront. We want people to understand where they are and what was there before and so on. And this is one thing that was there before. This is the Avalon Mill when it was burning. I find the whole Avalon community, the Avalon Mill, which is the piece of land right across from the entrance to the park now, to where the picnic shelter and the visitor center is now, the park offices. It's fascinating in that this mill obviously existed, but there was a whole mill village that existed around this mill. And I've seen pictures of it, read a little bit about it, but they actually picked up those mill houses and moved them into Mayo Dam by way of mules pulling them down the road and into town. So again, looking at the history of this place and what came before us is part of what we do. Just a couple other images of a couple spots that I thought were really interesting along the river. This is one sort of severe Horseshoe Bend. It's close to 220. The problem, there's an access challenge here. This would be a wonderful place for people to spend time because it's got that sort of 180 degree view of the river, but access here is going to be a bit challenging. This is an image along Buffalo Creek, one of the creeks that serves and comes into the Mayo. You've got Hickory Creek, Buffalo Creek, Falls Creek, and you know, it's important for us to go up these tributaries and sort of look at these spaces as well. So project objectives. Again, I mean, this all starts and needs to be within the goals and objectives and the mission of the State Parks Department, which I can't quote for you at the moment. But one of the things that's very important to this master planning process, as it has been to other state parks that we've worked on, is that our audience is a statewide audience. And so we go to great lengths to try to pull in you know, perspective and views, not just from the local community, which is very important, as I said before, but also you know, reach that statewide audience. Sometimes that comes in the form of involving various groups. There's a waterfalls group out there. There are off-road bike groups, there are equestrian groups, hiking groups, bird watching groups. So we try to engage as best we can and get the perspective of as many folks as we can. But again, local knowledge being very important to us. But again, the objectives all within the mission of the State Parks Department, which is essentially, without quoting it, to paraphrase it, is it's about protection of natural resources and cultural resources and providing recreational opportunities. Some of the things that we've been talking about so far, and probably won't come as any big surprise to many of you, but the first thing that rose to the top of the objectives list for this project was river access. Now that just doesn't mean putting a boat or a watercraft, kayak, or canoe into the water. It could mean hiking along the river. It could mean fishing. It could mean a lot of different things. Just being able to experience the river on some level. And one of the things that related to that we've talked a little bit about, you see it sort of further down on the slide on the list under various facilities, is a visitor center. You know, is there a future visitor center that's part of this plan? And, you know, a lot of people feel like it needs to be adjacent to, have some relationship with the river, which makes a lot of sense. The existing visitor center is really divorced from the river. You can't walk from the visitor center to the river. It's really sort of separated. So it's one of the things that we've been talking a lot about is river access, whether that means fishing. It could also mean, you know, paddling down the river and having opportunities to camp along the river corridor. Get out of your boat, pitch a tent on a platform or some other way of doing it. But we've talked about that as well. Trails is obviously big. You know, we have heard already in our conversations from the equestrians, we've heard from the off-road bike community, we've heard from the hikers. We had no doubt going into this that trails would be a big deal and something that people would be looking for. The third one on the list there is accommodations. And, you know, right now there's very limited opportunity for anyone to come to Mayo and spend the night or spend a couple nights. So we family style car camping. We've talked about primitive camping, you know, getting in your car, getting out of your car and heading down the corridor a couple miles before you find your camp spot. We've talked about RVs, you know, just a multiple opportunities for a variety of folks to camp to whatever level they're comfortable with. So accommodations right now, there is a single sort of group camping area at Mayo now, but that's it. And it lacks some facilities, but we have talked a lot about accommodations, overnight accommodations. That's also very important, I think, to the local economy, keeping folks in Rockingham County for a couple days. You know, they won't all cook on the fire. A lot of them will go into Mayo Dam, go into Stoneville, go into Madison, and eat dinner and spend money. So we want to keep them very important to the local economy to, you know, to capitalize on this asset that is the Mayo River. Resource protection is, you know, really should be, this is not in any order of priority, this list. And you know, resource protection is, again, I mentioned the balance, you know, it's that balance of protecting the resource but also providing people access to the resource. And achieving that balance is always a challenge. We were on the river, you know, Keith made the comment to me that once we improve the access to the river, we won't be alone. And that's okay. It was a wonderful paddle to be out there by ourselves, but you know, it's that, again, it's that balance. Historic interpretation, you know, we want to draw people's attention to things like the old Avalon Mill and the Avalon Village, provide opportunities for interpretation to, again, you know, create sort of a full experience. They're out there to be in nature, but, you know, other folks are interested in those historical components of the history of Mayo River. And, you know, we're going to do our best to unearth those, reveal those, and provide some interpretation of those. We've talked a lot about connectivity. Again, this is a linear park, but you know, doing everything we can to foster connections between the towns and the state park, other lands that are available for recreation. Piedmont Conservancy owns some land that's adjacent to the corridor. You know, how do we work with that property? And connect it perhaps to the park to just, provide as much and as long of experience as people want to have. I was actually meeting yesterday with the economic development director for Rockingham County. And we talked a little bit about it, and Keith talked about it on our paddle trip. Our paddle trip was 4+ hours. And he said he has led some paddle trips out there with folks that probably didn't want to go down the river that long. So, that's part of it, is providing opportunities for people to, take an 1.5-hour paddle or take a 2-hour paddle. Not everybody is up for the half day or full day paddle. So, but providing connectivity to the communities, to other lands, and within the park itself. I mean, there's a lot of missing, there's a lot of gaps in the trails. There's a lot of social trails out there that have existed for years, and but there's gaps. And the vision is that you ought to be able to walk from the Virginia line all the way down to the Dan River. That could be an option. So we're going to look for all those sort of connection opportunities. And then again, orientation. This kind of relates to being on the river and paddling and having some markers along the river to sort of tell you where you are, maybe tell you how long it is until you get to where you're going to take out. And just providing, it's a challenge because this is a linear park with several different access points. And communicating the orientation, where you are and how to get to where you want to go, is going to be important to this. We've talked about various facilities, and some of those I've already talked about in terms of accommodations, camping, RV, and all of that. The visitor center, is something we're talking about, a future visitor center, and where that might be located. Staff would certainly like to have some improved maintenance facilities. So there's that practical side of, them having the facilities that they need to keep the park in the kind of shape that it needs to be kept in. So that it's a wonderful experience for visitors. So, various facilities under that category, the biggest and sort of shiniest one being the visitor center, but there's a lot of other practical things that need to happen. So with that, community engagement, I alluded to it before. We find ourselves in a scenario these days where we can't do community engagement the way we used to. We hope that changes actually before this planning and the process for this master plan is complete. We still have some hope that we might be able to get together face to face and in person. But right now, we are limited to doing that virtually. So we always create a website for our projects, but this one is a little bit more robust. It's a little bit more interactive. It allows folks to go on the website and do a lot of different things. One, there's a simple online survey that you can take, but it also has the ability to interact with it. In other words, you can go to the website. You can, if you know that, let's say, for example, where Falls Creek comes in and joins the Mayo, that there's a wetland area there that has endangered species in it. And you are aware of that, and you want us to be aware of that. And there's the ability on this website to go in and put a dot or draw a circle around it and say, stay out of this area, or make this area available, or just, simply say, there's some interesting and valuable resources at this point along the corridor, so that we're aware of that. So we've taken our typical website and really kind of gone to the next level. This is an example of what the survey is. It's very simple, easy to and quickly complete. We do ask for some background information in terms of where a person lives, how old they are, what their demographic is. So we do, we want to understand who we're talking to, who we're getting input from. And then we have, this is the interactive map, or an example of the interactive map. You can see the sort of dots there, and the ability to, circle something or place a marker on the map to tell us that there's something of importance there. And then we have developed this, if you out there in the corridor, if you're at the state park and the access points that exist today, you might see this posted. We're working with some business owners as well as the towns, of course. You know, in our stakeholder committee, we've got representation from all 3 towns, from DRBA, from Piedmont Conservancy, and other groups. We've developed this flyer to sort of get the word out. You know, putting them in businesses in town, posting them around the access points at the park. So this is the address for the Mayo Master Plan, www.mayomasterplan.com. And I encourage you to go on and tell us what you know, because the more we know, the better the plan is going to be. And like I said before, we really rely on that local knowledge to inform us, so that we make sure that we, you know, we're really taking into account everything that needs to be accounted for. So you can help, and I hope that you do. And with that, I think I've covered it. I wanted to leave plenty of time if we had questions to address those. So there you have it. Again, thank you for your time and having me on this afternoon. I hope you got something out of it. Hope you enjoyed it. And again, if you have any questions, I'd be glad to address those.
Thank you so much, Brian. We really appreciate you spending our lunch hour helping us understand more about what is happening with the Mayo Master Plan. Right now, I'm going to open it up for questions. I don't see any questions right now, but I actually...
Tiffany, do you want me to stop the sharing on my screen?
It doesn't matter. You can leave this screen up. That's just fine.
And we can go back to anything that anybody wants to.
Absolutely. I actually had a question. In terms of timeline, you said that you were hoping to have the final master plan completed in September, October timeframe. When is the public input section going to stop? How long do people have to get on that website and give their input?
The initial survey that's on the website right now, I think, is clocked to the end of June.
Okay, so
but let me be totally clear. That's not the end of community input. We're going to go right up through that draft final document. So as we're developing plans, as we're developing ideas, we're going to put those on the website. So the website will change at some point to, you know, we're never going to say, don't tell us about that area that you think is special, but we're going to add to it. And you'll be able to go on and, for example, we might come up with a couple different concepts for a particular area on the river. You know, is this area more appropriate for tent camping or RV camping? I mean, that's a simple sort of example. So the community will have a chance to give us feedback on our ideas as well as we go forward.
Okay, thank you. Brian, we actually do have a question who's come in. Who are the stakeholders? Not the names of the people, just who are making up the stakeholder committee.
Okay, well, we've got...
Refresh us on that. I know DRBA is one.
DRBA is one. We have representation from the towns of Mayo Dam, Madison, and Stoneville. We have the Economic Development Director for Rockingham County. We have park rangers from the Virginia Park System. We have some local folks that are involved in EMS activities. You know, we need that sort of input. We have a couple members from the Friends of Mayo Group, and we have a couple business owners in Mayo Dam particularly. One in particular that's going to be very involved. And of course, the former superintendent, as of last Wednesday, Keith Martin, will also become part of that stakeholder committee, but as a member of the Friends of Mayo.
Good, thank you. A lot of people don't probably realize that, you know, this was DRBA's first project way back when, and we've actually been working on the Virginia side of the Mayo Park for about a decade now, hoping to get that turned into a park that's able to be open to the public as well. So we have been working on that for quite some time.
We have a lot of, there's a lot, there's some excitement about the opportunity to partner with the state of Virginia. And
that makes me happy.
I think there's an opportunity there that just simply can't be ignored. Rivers don't care where the state line is.
That is exactly right. We have another question that came in. What would you suggest we can do as equine trail riders to make sure our voices are heard?
Just get on the website and tell us. Really, that's, right now, that's our mode of interaction, unfortunately. But and if you belong to a group, an equestrian group, maybe it's a group that we've overlooked, but make sure the leadership of that group has information on the website and they can distribute it. We've asked the Piedmont Conservative, we've asked DRBA, we've asked the towns and Rockingham County to utilize the vehicles that they use to communicate with their constituents and to push it out. Push out the website. Let people know about www.mayomasterplan.com. Just get the word out and pass it on. Feel free to pass it on. There's no restrictions whatsoever in passing that website on to people that you think might be interested and can provide us some input.
Well, thank you. We have another question. Where are you on the VA part? Well, we have had many state people down from Virginia to look at it. We have had access to the property several times for field work. We've been working with the Virginia State Parks staff, mostly from Ferry Stone. I'm not able really to say where we are at the moment. There's so many different moving parts that are happening all at the same time, but I promise you we are not going to give up. Another question just came in. Do you work with the North Carolina or Virginia Horse Council when it comes to the master plan?
I can't remember if they're specifically on our list or not. We're happy to have, their input. That's not a group that rings an immediate bell for me.
Okay, well, good to know.
Yeah.
And hopefully the person who is posting can share with members to get on that mayomasterplan.com site and share their input.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, any other questions out there? This is your last chance. Thank you so much, everyone, for sticking with us and having lunch with DRBA tonight. We hope you'll join us for the next 3 webinars that are happening for the month. You can check that out on our website. And also, we really hope that you will participate in the June 6th virtual FSO for Saturday outing. Have a great day. Enjoy this gorgeous weather. And Brian, again, thank you so much for your time.
Glad to do it. Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye now.